For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Milan Solomons. Today I'm joined by Professor of Sociology at University of Johannesburg, Ashwin Desai, to discuss his latest book, Reverse Sweep, a story of South African cricket since apartheid. So what was the reason that you decided to write this book?
Well, I think I've lived my whole life with cricket. You know, I was dragged along. I was one of those kids who were dragged along by his father when he was 4 years old to cricket grounds, where my father was a journeyman cricketer, but loved the game. And so always been imbued with cricket. And it's a bit of a personal story also, is that I was brought up in the centre of Durban, and it was basically a concrete jungle. They're just pavements and roads, and I was asthmatic. And my uncle devised a game where you'd use dice and you'd have cricket teams playing against each other. So at a time when we were completely cut off from global cricket, I knew the names of Worrell, Walcott and Weeks. I knew all the Indian and West Indian and English cricketers and so on. So I had without knowing it, I had a sense of history. And so when I in a way became a historian, I wanted to bring that to bear on telling the contemporary story of South African cricket, but with a historical backdrop.
How has the book been received to date?
Well, history is all the rage now, you know, and even on the campus and everywhere, people, once again, every time when we hear stories of xenophobia, we always get told by the ANC government that, you know, people should understand our history. Of course, the ANC government basically got rid of history in schools and so on, so it's rich coming from them. But nonetheless, I think with the whole controversy over Cecil John Rhodes' statue, the whole debate about decolonization, history has returned and history matters. So in that sense, I think it has been critically received. On the other hand, these things are always controversial things, and the kind of historians of the generation before me, especially the school teacher historians, is just evidence-based. You put out the evidence and you let people judge for themselves. So a lot of my old teachers have been a bit critical, but generally I think people have accepted that it's a contention of ideas. And I'm trying to write a different narrative to understanding not only South African cricket, but the transition as it unfolds.
The title of the book is Reverse Sweep, a story of South African cricket since apartheid. Can you explain to us a bit about the status of cricket in black communities during this period and how people contributed to keeping the game alive within the black community?
Well, I mean, Ilana, it's beautifully put. I mean, in the sense that it's a wonderful story, but a tragic story in many senses. That in the 1950s, it would appear to me and many seasoned followers of cricket that black cricket in general was pretty vibrant and pretty competitive compared to white cricket. So it was a time not only of Basil de Oliveira, although he becomes the big icon, but there are people like Ben Malamba, Lefty Adams, really good cricketers who possibly at least would make it at the top of the county level cricket. But there was something interesting also happening politically there, that in 1950, for example, it had Indians, Coloureds, Africans and Malays playing each other, sort of aping what apartheid was trying to do. But they broke those racial barriers and you sort of had a united non-racial team playing a South African team, captained by Basil de Oliveira. So they were at the height of their powers. But progressively with the onslaught of the Group Areas Act, the erosion of old cricket clubs and so on, cricket goes downwards. And it's basically about just playing the game. I don't think many would argue that we were producing Basil de Oliveiras by the late 1970s. So it's a trajectory I try to cover, but I think I call it liberation cricket. I think people playing more than cricket. They were firstly keeping the game alive, but they were also highlighting the fact that every aspect of South African society was infused with the strictures of racism and racial boundaries. And by doing that, they were like the conscience to a wider world that was starting to develop an anti-apartheid movement with sport at the center of that protest.
You spend a considerable amount of time in the book critiquing the history and legacy of Dr. Ali Bacher. Can you explain why this is?
Okay, well, it's twofold. And on the one hand, I think he was, as I say, he might have been, in his own words, is sort of quite a moderate batsman in an age where he played, where probably we produced some of the greatest batsmen that our country's ever seen. I mean, epitomized by Graham Pollock and Barry Richards, right? I mean, I don't think we're ever going to see a Barry Richards drive again and a pull by Graham Pollock. And there, Ali Bacher slotted in, but he always was pretty competent. And in the cricketing transition, he really played a fantastic role of juggling many tensions and many contradictions. However, my main critique of Ali Bacher, and this could be not a deliberate act by him, is that we're very sensitive to the fact that we're trying to recover black cricketing history for many reasons that has been rendered invisible. And so an example that I present in the book is that there's a book co-authored by him, Jacques Cullis and 12 other all-rounders. And of course, only one chapter is given to one black player, and that's Basil de Oliveira. However, so that in itself is problematic, because how would he know that there weren't other cricketers? And I think this produces a big debate in cricket, is that how do you compare people playing in the most atrocious of conditions, who make 40 on those matches, on those pitches, and somebody who's playing in beautiful pitches and makes 90? It's very hard to make those comparisons. But nonetheless, further than just having Basil de Oliveira, in fact, in the chapter on Basil de Oliveira, there are 4 other black cricketers who don't even get mentioned in the title, who are named. But further than that, it's just bad history, because one of those cricketers was Dick Abed. And if there ever is a time we can compare 2 cricketers, is Dick Abed played in the Lancashire League at the same time as Pat Trimborn, who was a fast bowler. And when you make those comparisons, it's hard to tell them apart in terms of the statistics. What told them apart was the color of their skin. And so, what I'm critiquing Ali Bacher for, albeit I would grant unconsciously, is that he, in attempt to write in black history, he writes them out. In attempt to redress the past, he digs those trenches even deeper. And so this is not only Ali Bacher. It's symptomatic of many writers sometimes who, and commentators, who sometimes when they refer to icons of the past can't go beyond white names. So Hashim Amla is the new Graham Pollock. Mackay and Tini would be the, new Peter Pollock. And so yet, if we're going to be serious of bringing these histories together and trying to understand them post-apartheid, then we have to think about recovering black history in a much more sensitive way than Ali Bacher has.
A key theme of the book relates to transformation and the empowerment of black cricketers. Do you think enough is being done at the domestic franchise level to empower black cricketers?
Yeah, I think, Ilan, these are complex matters, and who would want to be a cricket administrator, right? Damned if you do, damned if you don't. And what I try to show in the book, rather than just passing judgment, is trying to show the complexities of me or you being a sort of running a franchise cricket, knowing that we want to bring black cricketers through, knowing that there is a wink, wink, nudge, nudge quota system. We want to hold on to our best black cricketers. At the same time, we know that generally the ANC government has done very little for township sport in schools. And so the market that we're getting the cricketers from is very limited. And ironically, it is the much maligned private schools that produce the gem of black cricketers, number one. Number two is that once black cricketers know that they have to be in the squad, they then become people who can use their new financial power to move from one franchise to another. And thirdly, there has been a strange sort of subliminal current amongst some people involved in cricket, especially black administrators, saying not only we must be play a certain amount of black players, but because they are put in the team but they don't bowl at the right time or they don't bat high up the order, you must also dictate how many overs a black person should bowl, and that at least one of them should be an opening batsman or number 4 batsman. This is where I come down upon that kind of engineering, because if you appoint a captain, then the captain should be somebody who is sensitive, who's somebody who isn't a racist, but somebody who needs to read the game. And sometimes you're going to bowl a spinner, sometimes you're going to push the wicket keeper up the order, sometimes you're going to push them down. And so while I think all of us are sensitive to the fact that we want to really stamp out the sort of petty racism that sometimes is infused in cricket and how people think about who is good enough or not. And rugby is probably an example of this, where, Brayton Paul is too small to play on the wing and so on, these kind of prejudices from the old. At the same time, we mustn't bend the bat so far that we begin to do this sort of minutiae of political engineering, if you want to call it that.
The issue of whiteness and white privilege is raised multiple times in the book. Can you explain the impact that these themes have on the ability of black cricketers to advance within the game?
I think this is it's a vital issue. Many of us don't like to deal with race, and because those who deal with race and put race on the agenda suddenly become the racists, or using race as an excuse. It's a very difficult thing, but probably. So a black cricketer comes in, Mackay Ntini. He's had a tough life. He's had to go to Dale College in an alien environment. He realizes a lot is on his shoulders. Mm-hmm. He enters the change room, and there are two kinds of things happen in the change room. There's already a small clique of cricketers that stick together, 3 or 4 people. And Mackay Ntini is not part of the clique. The 3 or 4 cricketers are all white. They often come from almost the same school, same cultural background. And then Alan Donald says, we accept anybody into our change room as long as they fit in. And he's not realizing the fitting in is through the sort of cultural dominance of white cricketers. And if the antithesis operated is that if 6 of the cricketers happen to be Xhosa speaking and they all only spoke Xhosa and Alan Donald's were there, how would he feel? So a lot of what many of us did were involved in the inside of cricket. I think we were pretty good at ensuring that black cricketers were good, got into national teams, but the psychological sort of support we did not give to black cricketers. Neither did we understand that there's one thing to be on the field, there's another thing to be in the change room. And this emerges in the writings of even a guy like Herschel Gibbs, who's probably one of the most deracinated cosmopolitan figures you can get, who in his biography, it's a startling biography, talks about these divisions that start to merge and a hurt that starts to emerge sometimes from black cricketers who felt left out. So I think what we do is I pick this up sometimes when I go to Durban and I go to a pub and 90% of the people at that pub happen to be of Indian origin. And for them, that's the world. And Indianness is this, there's nothing else, and we normalize that, and I think it's symptomatic of that, and we need to deal with that, and these are not things that you deal with overnight, but I think it's just a sensitivity, and I think you almost get it in a body language, and sociologists shouldn't talk like this. You almost see it beautifully in Faf du Plessis, the way he reacts to his teammates, the way people hug, the kind of closeness and a bond that seems to emerge. I might be wrong because I'm saying this from a distance, but there's something much different from this than the standoffishness of a Graham Smith or Hansie Cronje or Kepler Wessels.
You highlight the issue of the lack of investment in township cricket, and you make mention of a particularly sad case of a youngster from the township of Kagiso. Can you elaborate on this issue and how the lack of investment is impacting the ability of young black cricketers to make their way in the game?
Yeah, I think, once again, all this is such a steep learning curve in South Africa, and cricket is an expensive game. And when you don't have facilities, then you actually bring good cricketers from the township into a city environment that can be alienating. There's no idea how people got there, the time they travel, whether they've eaten, and so on. So there's those kinds of things, besides the huge cultural and social issues to deal with. Then there's issues of the early nutrition, which ex-Judge Chris Nicholson so brilliantly highlights in an article that, there's in Gam, he's just going to be a brilliant bowler, right? And just the bone structure, was just too sensitive to be able to withstand the rigors of international cricket. So there's Rabada. Me and you want him to be in the team. Me and you get a sort of a sense of glory in ourselves that things are changing. Or Temba Bavuma. But then he's going to play every game. He's not going to be rested, because once he's rested, then they're going to say it's racism, or we might not meet the quota. And so here we destroy somebody that we're supposed to be nurturing. These are very difficult things of transition politics. And what I want to bring to focus in this transition politics is the crass speechifying of the government, and especially our present minister, Fikile Mbalula. You know, what gross blinkers you must have to say that, for example, you know, the protests didn't meet certain targets, so therefore you're not going to have international cricket. This is a government that misses targets all the time, you know, whether it's from employment to inequality. And he himself, you know, as they call it, you know, Mr. Razmataz, you know, that the government needs to be brought into the dock about what is it doing to seek a partnership with cricket to nurture township cricket, and so I try to bring the focus, and that is why I try to maybe to preempt another question, is that, you know, the two I find sort of irritating when I was involved in cricket. There's the non-racialists. So don't mention race. Race doesn't exist. You know, seemingly principled, and the sort of African chauvinists. Everything is like African. And both somehow meet and have a kind of joint project. They never mention government. They never bring into criticism the state. Because for them, you know, privilege is something that they take for granted. You know, so I try to introduce in the book this idea of a militant non-racialism that not only talks about the national team is inevitably going to be black and dominant black by sheer numbers, but that doesn't mean that we made the game popular. And more than ever, we need to popularize the game because of the tensions between the globalization of the game and IPL and national teams. So, you know, I don't have a solution, but I want to problematize these things rather than just having, you know, sort of things that we can go to, like scientific solutions to these immense problems that we face.
How do you propose that we seek the correct balance between trying to ensure there is transformation within our national squads, while avoiding the situation that arose in 2008 with Charles Langeveld, a coloured cricketer who withdrew from a team on the basis that he felt that he was only being selected because of his race?
Yeah, you know, I mean, this bedevils history, right? I mean, the point is that even politically, you know, you can do the Pol Pot thing, where you just, you know, go for a scorched earth policy, and history doesn't exist. History starts on day one that Pol Pot comes to power, or you know, so that kind of thing. But given the way South Africa has unfolded, given the transition, and given the fact that we inherited stuff from the past, you know, we're going to have to think through these issues, and there are going to be these bumps. And there are going to be these aberrations, and there are going to be personal hurts and personal missed opportunities. And, you know, I think if me and you were sitting at that time in Cricket South Africa, the Langeveld issue, we would have dealt with it very differently, simply because we didn't want Langeveld to make that decision for himself. And what kind of subliminal and unconscious pressures were brought to bear upon him in the change room, because how much better was Andre Nel really, and so on and so on. And so, but when we heighten these things, you know, I think the first time I walked into UJ as a full professor into the Senate, and I got up to speak, nobody was nasty to me, but I thought all of them think, oh, he must be an affirmative action professor. And I was caught between telling them, this is my CV, and ignoring it and getting on with the job at hand. And I think we all feel that tension. And, you know, this is replete in South Africa. We don't have to take ownership of anything in South Africa. We didn't get the job because of our race. You know, we were fired because of our race. That other person got the job because of their race. You know, we don't have to deal with it on. So you're absolutely right. I think the need for the balance is more than ever, because we are really facing an apocalypse in cricket. And I don't know how much cricket South Africa is thinking about this. Simply just look at the West Indies versus England now. It's heartbreaking, isn't it? I mean, none of those players we recognise. The Chris Gale is not there. The Darren Sammy is not there. The Bravo Jacobs not there, because they are now de-linked from the nation. They earn more money in 6 weeks with the IPL than they could earn in 6 years probably for the West Indies. And it was cruel to watch where England comes with their full batch of cricketers, even probably one of the most highly played cricketers in the world. Ben Stokes is in the team and there was no game. So similarly in South Africa, we can already see, if we don't take account of the IPL and the globalization of the game, you can see probably our best and most marvelous cricketer, A.B. de Villiers, is already hedging his bets. And similar things are going to happen down the line. And me and you are not going to watch a Proteas C team against the A team of England. We're just going to switch off our televisions. So the balance is about also the futuristic way of thinking about, while we're worried about quotas and getting the racial balance right, the horse has bolted. And I try to also do that in the book about these tensions between the kind of global cricketer, the cosmopolitan cricketer, dealing from the state, and our national teams.
Lastly, how do you see South African cricket at this point in time? Where do we stand? And what are our prospects for the future?
Yeah, once again, it's the traditional question. How much have we? I always think about this. When I talk to my students. And it's sometimes a horrible analogy that might not meet the test of historical scrutiny. I said, sometimes you wonder how the ANC intelligence services and the National Party intelligence services got together so quickly. Well, they both had the same psychology. You had the boss, you followed the boss's orders, you didn't question it, And so in many ways, the National Party and the ANC were similar. One come from a kind of Stalinist background, no creative thinking, we had war and you just got on with it, and similarly with the National Party. And it was epitomized sometimes in our rugby when I think it was the 74 Lions came to play here and they were giving us a hiding. And because, they changed the nature of rugby. JPR Williams of running fullback, Gareth Edwards was a sort of flexible sort of scrum half. Phil Bennett was a running fly half. And when we were under pressure, we went and appointed a number 8 as our scrum half. We just couldn't think creatively. And the teams that think creatively get ahead. So for one moment, Sri Lanka changed the nature of the game when they put a pinch hitter up ahead. Before, if you got 40 runs, 50 runs of 10 overs, you're okay. And then Jayasuriya comes, they change the nature of the game, they win the World Cup, other nations catch up. And I sometimes wonder whether in our own psychologies that we're not flexible enough. Herschel Gibbs writes about this. He gives a wonderful quote, Ilan. He says, against, I think, the Dutch or whatever, he had 5 sixes. And he was going for the 6th one, and Jacques Kallis walked around and said, play it with a straight bat. And he said, this can epitomize the carefulness. And we could see that in Kepler and so on. And so, do we have plan B? Number one. Do we have the sensitivity? Do we have the will to sometimes change our teams halfway through the tournament? And change from maybe 3-prong pace attack to playing 2 spinners, to playing 3 spinners. This is a challenge for us. And how much our own belief as a nation just overall allows us to create the space for imaginative captains, imaginative selectors who chance their arm.
Can we expect more books from you in future?
I'm really thinking of writing a book on what I've called decolonization of a special type, capital wars in South Africa. And it's really, I would like to call it the sociology of Guptology. I really want to understand and come to grips with this discourse and not get carried away with it by this whole talk of decolonization. This contest between the Guptas and what is seen as white monopoly capital. What underlies this? But go deeper to have a sense that, and I was very intrigued when I went to India, the colonialism, they didn't completely dominate India. So the Tatars and so on were rich during colonialism. They had an Indian bourgeoisie. But in South Africa, an African bourgeoisie was completely eradicated. The most we had was a few lawyers like Mandela and them running around. But you couldn't talk about sort of rich African people in the 40s and 50s and so on, because they were broken. And how much this has now impacted that if the state's policy is to have a black bourgeoisie, then can you actually do that by nice means? That black bourgeoisie is going to feed off the state and so on, which then places into contention the whole notion of corruption, competition and so on. So I sort of thinking it in my head, but I sometimes think about a book like a cricket innings. You know, you've got to construct it and you have to have patience, and you know, sometimes somebody's going to drop a catch and it mustn't affect you. You take your guard again and you start again as if the innings is starting again. And my father always said to me, he loved Dennis Compton. And he said, you know what Dennis Compton did? It might have been a myth. What Dennis Compton did when he got to 50, he took his guard again to show the bowler that, you know, I haven't even started yet. So I hope I can write a book of that sort.
That was Ashwin Desai discussing his latest book, Reverse Sweep, a story of South African cricket since apartheid.